Hey everybody, this is WMAX Boston Powerhouse radio personality, Jimmy J. I want to introduce you to an exciting and informative podcast about a great sport I've always loved, harness racing. Now, here it is, the Harness Racing Alumni Show, with your host, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
Welcome to the Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin, Bob Marks, and Murray Brown. This week's show, we are dedicating to the memory of our good friend, Hall of Fame trainer, Ronnie Gurfein, who passed away on May 5th. We honor him by rebroadcasting his October 29th, 2019 interview on the Harness Racing Alumni Show. Before we continue with the Gurfein interview, here's Murray Brown with a Ronnie Gurfein eulogy.
I was privileged enough to know Ronnie for in excess of half a century. Like I say about most people, we're all very, very different shades of gray. There are no pure whites, there are no blacks. But Ronnie was a very, very light gray. To know him was to love him. He was a man of various trades. He could do just about everything. It was harness racing's great privilege that he became a horse trainer, and one of the very best.
Thank you, Murray. Now, the Ronnie Gurfein interview. This week's guest is Ronnie Gurfein, a harness racing Hall of Fame trainer, a three-time winner of the Hamiltonian, and currently is writing a very successful column for the weekly publication of Harness Racing Update. Ronnie, welcome on our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ronnie, I've known you since I was a kid, and the first time that I ever heard your nickname, the Guru, is when Bruce Beck mentioned it on the Breeders' Crown broadcast. Who originated it?
You know who originated it? The guy who wrote for Sports Eye. You can help me out here with his name. He was he still does. He still does some broadcasting at Yonkers once in a while, and does some
Jay Bergman, maybe.
Jay Bergman, yeah. Jay Bergman in Sports Eye. The year that I had Victory Dream, he published something in the Daily News. You know, these are the days when, you know,
right.
It was in the Times, it was in the News, it was in the Post, it was in all the New York papers. And he published something in Sports Eye, and then it ended up in the Daily News or in the Post or something like that. And that's where the name came from. When
you had Continental Victory, when did you first suspect that there was something special?
Oh, I knew right away. I mean, that's why I tell people, you know, it's easy to prognosticate what happens with the trotter. It's not so easy to prognosticate what happens with the pacer, because pacers, they seem great all the time, or they have to get in a horse race in order to make a decision whether they're good or bad. A trotter is great gaited and shows that like explosive bit of speed any time in a mile, or, you know, shows like a brush or something like that. I'm talking about going a mile in 3 minutes, you could still tell. Except exceptional horses. I think I can pretty much pick out an exceptional horse in the field. I don't even need to sit behind him anymore.
When did you first suspect Self-Possessed was special, and how fast do you think he might have gone under today's conditions?
What a great question that is. Why don't you write into me once in a while? You know, he was a big, lonesome going horse and never showed the kind of speed that Continental Victory had, although he was probably a much faster horse. But he wasn't really much of a 2-year-old. I mean, he was okay, but CR Commando was like a gorilla. And, you know, we ended up chasing him all year. Self-Possessed never really came into himself until he was a 3-year-old. And when he was 3-year-old, he really got his act together. Had some problems, gave me a lot of gray hairs. But how fast was he? I'd say he had not green shoe kind of speed, but pretty damn close. I'm going to say that after the Hamiltonian, Mike and I discussed it, and he truly felt that colt could have broke into like a 149-4 or a 149-3 mile that day, because he was on idle going in 151. And you forget that we were racing to a wooden bike. You really don't know under the conditions of the track the way it is today, and with a fancy bike, et cetera, how fast he really could have gone. But I would put him up against any horse that ever lived, except maybe Green Shoe.
Well, that's going to lead me into my next question. How much better is the trotting breed today than it was when you first started?
It's completely different. Absolutely completely different. I trained Regal Picks, and I trained Stars Prides, and as a matter of fact, that's when I first met you guys. Trade was training at Monticello with me, and he loved trotters also. And we were training some bad bred horses. And,
he still does love trotters.
those things paced as often as they trotted. I remember I had a Regal Pick filly. I remember training 7 trips one day when it was about 6 degrees outside just to get it to trot. I mean, it's a totally different breed today. They were born to trot, and the gait is getting lower and lower and lower and lower. You see, a lot of the trotters today have much longer cannon bones than the good trotters of old. Stars Brides had little short cannon bones. And I was at Hanover yesterday looking at yearlings, and I noticed that Father Patrick is sort of like a throwback, even though he's like third-generation Valley Victory and a son of Cantab Hall, who had a short cannon bone and but not that short. He's got a lot of his horses have really, really short cannon bones, which is something I really like. But it's sort of like out of fashion now with the new sires like Chapter 7 and Muscle Hill, because Muscle Hill probably has the longest cannon of any trotter I've ever seen. And look what he's done. The gait has gotten completely different. They reach more, they fold less, and they go. So it's much harder to pick out a horse today than it was 20 years ago.
And my last question, where do you see harness racing being in 20 years from now?
That's a tough answer. They keep telling us we're dead, and now we had $2 million yearlings last week, and we have new tracks opening all over the place. If the VLTs cave in to the pressure, the expense of having horse racing, then we'll be in trouble. But somehow or other, I don't think that local governments are going to let them get away with it, because it will displace a lot of jobs. It will displace a lot of people for livelihoods that their great-great-grandparents were a part of. So basically, I don't see a major resurgence because there's just too many other ways to gamble and other ways of entertainment today than there were when we were kids. I mean, our fathers, I'm sure like guys like Bob Marks and I, who are about the same age, our parents, took us to the racetrack because there were only 8 baseball teams and there were only 8 basketball teams. It's not like there was a whole bunch of other things to do. There was no lottery. Every day something new pops up. So, do I see it getting better? It's not going to get better. But do I see it hanging around? I could see it hanging around for all time.
I agree with you, and I think that there's a lot that we could do in our industry to actually bring more people to the track. And we just really have to put our heads together and come up with some plans and make some changes.
But we've been saying that for 50 years.
But you're on a show where we try to take some action, and we're trying to do stuff. So.
Well, while we're on the subject of taking some action, I wrote in my column last week about a very, very capable and famed veterinarian that gave me the outline to prove to me that EPO was not the problem in the sport, but milkshaking was. And I put out simple guidelines for any racing commission to follow, and I got no feedback whatsoever. None. Now, you'd think that some guy somewhere in some racing commission, whether it be in Idaho or whether it be in Pennsylvania or New York or whatever, would have called and asked to find out, tell me the name of the veterinarian that gave you that information. We'd like to discuss it with him because we'd like to trim our levels of bicarb so that we could stop the cheating in the sport. Nothing. No, not a word.
I'll send a copy of it over to Joe Gorachek. He was on our show. He can probably get you some action on it.
Anything you could do. I would appreciate anything you could do. Because
I will do that.
It's got to the point, to me, of insanity.
I agree. And, we had Ray Schnittner on the show a few weeks back.
Ray helped me a lot in that Garrett Dow's thing. I mean, Ray was very, very supportive of me. And we've been friends for a long time. And like he said, I don't have his phone number and he doesn't have mine. Josh Marks accused him in the winner's circle of feeding me all that information. Like he called me up, and he had nothing to do but call me up and tell me about Garrett Dow's. And the guy's got a stable of 25 or 35 horses. All that he needs to do is call Ronnie Gurfein and tell him about Garrett Dow's.
I don't know, Ronnie. When you started out, did they give you 100 horses your first year?
I never had 100. The most amount of horses I ever trained was about 30. I never had a big stable. I never wanted to have a big stable. I can't see how these guys do it. You take Ronnie Burke training 200 horses? To me, it doesn't work. I mean, he's a miracle, man. It's insane.
You don't sleep. You just work all the time.
I like to sleep.
Ronnie, I know you have a plane to catch, thank you so much for being on our show. And you have an open invitation to come back anytime that you like, and I will try and help get you some action going on that.
It was truly a pleasure, and I hope that all the people that are listening, if anyone has any information that's tangible to tell me. I get letters every day from people telling me stories. I can't publish innuendo, because if I publish innuendo, I leave the paper open to lawsuit. There are guys out there that are bad people, and we all know who they are. But we need proof in order to stop them from presenting the world with their magic.
Yep.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a safe flight.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this week's show. Rest in peace, Ronnie. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune in next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show,